Billionaire came home unexpectedly and saw the maid with his paralyzed triplets. What he saw shocked him. The tires of the black Maybach crunched softly over the gravel driveway of the Sterling estate, a sound that usually signaled the end of another grueling business trip for Arthur Sterling. At 40, Arthur was a man defined by his monumental successes in the boardroom and the cavernous, echoing emptiness of his personal life. He was handsome in a severe, almost brittle way, his tailored suits acting as armor against a world he no longer trusted. Today, he was home 3 days early from Zurich. The merger had closed faster than anticipated, and for the first time in years, he felt a strange, magnetic pull to return to the sprawling mansion that housed his greatest tragedy. He didn't announce his arrival. He rarely did anymore. The staff was used to his phantom-like presence. He was a checkbook, a silhouette passing through hallways, a man who couldn't bear to make eye contact with his own children. Entering the massive front foyer, Arthur was greeted by the familiar, oppressive silence. It was a thick, heavy quiet that had settled over the house 3 years ago, the night the highway patrol knocked on the door at 2:30 a.m. Before that night, the house had vibrated with the chaotic energy of 3 teenage boys. Lucas, Nathan, and Oliver, his golden triplets. They had been captains of varsity teams, debating champions, fiercely competitive and inseparable. Then came the slick roads, the lost control, and the horrific crash that spared their lives but severed their connection to their lower bodies. 3 years. 3 years of surgeries, specialists, state-of-the-art rehabilitation centers, and an endless parade of stern-faced nurses. The boys, now 19, had retreated into a collective shell of furious despair. They refused to leave their converted ground-floor suites. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was with venom. They often refused solid food, preferring the clinical efficiency of nutrient shakes, as if eating a real meal required an effort of living they weren't willing to make. Arthur, unable to fix them with money and unable to face their accusations of his absence, had buried himself in work. He dropped his briefcase by the stairs, loosening his tie. He expected to find them in their darkened rooms, perhaps watching television with glazed eyes, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and unwashed linen. He walked toward the back of the house, toward the expansive wall of glass doors that led to the terrace overlooking the manicured grounds. He stopped. A sound. It was faint, alien in this house, a clinking of cutlery against china. And then something even more terrifyingly unfamiliar, a soft, genuine laugh. Arthur moved with a sudden, desperate stealth, sliding behind a large potted ficus near the glass doors. His heart hammered against his ribs with a painful intensity. He peered through the glass, and the scene before him punched the breath from his lungs, leaving him frozen, just as he appeared in the doorway in his mind's eye, a man paralyzed by the sight of his own family. It was lunchtime. The autumn sun was warm, bathing the vast wooden deck in golden light, and they were outside, all 3 of them. Lucas, Nathan, and Oliver were sitting in their high-end, customized wheelchairs. But they weren't slumped over, hoodies pulled low to hide their faces, as was their usual custom. They were sitting upright. In the center of the deck was a table draped in a crisp white cloth, set properly with silverware and cloth napkins. There were platters of food, real food. A basket of crusty bread, a pitcher of iced tea, a silver coffee pot, and plates piled with what looked like a rich, tomato-based pasta. And then there was the girl. Arthur knew Mrs. Higgins, the stern head housekeeper, had hired a new maid 3 weeks ago, after the last specialized nurse had quit in a storm of tears, calling the boys ungovernable sociopaths. Arthur hadn't even asked the new maid's name. He just signed the checks. She was young, perhaps 21, with dark skin that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun, and her hair pulled back in a practical yet stylish band. She wore a simple black dress and a white apron, But she didn't move like a servant terrified of her charges. Mia Carter was moving between the wheelchairs, not with the clinical detachment of a nurse, but with the easy grace of a hostess at a dinner party. Arthur watched, mesmerized, as Mia leaned in toward Nathan. Nathan, the most artistic and sensitive of the three, who hadn't held a paintbrush since the accident and usually kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Mia said something low, pointing to the pasta on his plate. Nathan looked up at her, a flicker of irritation on his face. He shook his head. Arthur braced himself for the usual outburst, the thrown plate, the shouted curse. Instead, Mia didn't back down. She didn't baby him. She put a hand on her hip and cocked her head, her expression challenging but playful. She gestured to the fork. "Pick it up," her body language said. Slowly, agonizingly, Nathan's hand moved from his lap. His motor control in his hands was shaky, a lingering effect of the spinal trauma. He grasped the fork, his knuckles white. He managed to spear a piece of pasta and bring it to his mouth. Mia clapped her hands together silently, a brilliant, encouraging smile lighting up her face. Arthur felt a stinging behind his eyes. He hadn't seen Nathan feed himself a full meal in 6 months, but the greatest shock was yet to come. Arthur's gaze shifted to Lucas. Lucas had always been the ringleader, the quarterback, the loudest and brightest. The accident had hit him hardest. His rage was volcanic. He was the reason most of the staff quit. Lucas was staring at Mia as she poured iced tea into Oliver's glass. Mia must have sensed his gaze because she turned, caught his eye, and winked, and then it happened. The impossible thing. Lucas, the boy whose face had been a mask of stone granite for 3 long years, cracked. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. It wasn't just a grimace, it was a smile, a genuine, reluctant, beautiful smile. Arthur felt his knees weaken. He gripped the doorframe of the patio entrance, his knuckles turning white. He was witnessing a resurrection. He had spent millions on the best neurologists in the world, and none of them had been able to elicit a smile from Lucas Sterling. He needed to go out there. He needed to demand to know what was happening, how this miracle was occurring under his nose without his permission. But fear held him back. He was afraid that if he stepped onto that balcony, if he inserted his toxic presence into this fragile ecosystem, the spell would break. The boys would see him, and the darkness would return. So, the billionaire king of industry hid behind a door in his own house, watching a 21-year-old maid achieve the impossible. As the lunch wound down, Mia began clearing the plates. The boys didn't immediately demand to be taken back inside to their caves. They remained in the sun, looking content. Arthur strained his ears as Mia leaned in close to the triplets, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He realized with a jolt that she wasn't just serving them, she was plotting with them. "Okay, boys," he heard Mia say, her voice like rich honey. "Phase 1 is complete. You actually ate carb-loaded pasta in the sunlight without turning into dust. I told you it wouldn't kill you." A low chuckle from Oliver. "Shut up, Mia. It was okay. The sauce was a little salty." "Everyone's a critic," Mia retorted playfully, stacking the plates with efficiency. Then her demeanor changed. She leaned in closer, resting her hands on the arms of Lucas's chair. Her voice became serious, intense. "Now listen to me. We have to be careful. If Mrs. Higgins sees you like this, happy, eating, acting like human beings, she's going to report it to your father. And you know what he's like. He thinks you're made of glass. He'll bring back the Nurse Ratcheds and the liquid diets. We have to keep this our secret until you're stronger. Deal?" Arthur felt like he had been punched in the gut. "You know what he's like." Lucas looked up at her, the smile gone, replaced by a look of intense determination that Arthur hadn't seen since the state championships 4 years ago. "Deal," Lucas said, his voice rough from disuse but firm. "We don't tell Dad anything. He wouldn't understand anyway. He prefers us broken." Arthur reeled back from the door, stumbling slightly. The words were a physical assault. "He prefers us broken." Was that what they thought? That his distance, his hiring of strict medical professionals, was because he wanted them this way? He looked back one last time. The tableau on the balcony was picture perfect. A family lunch, minus the father. The young maid stood like a guardian angel over his damaged sons, offering them something he hadn't been able to buy, a reason to want to be alive tomorrow. Arthur retreated into the shadows of the hallway, his mind racing, his heart breaking all over again. He couldn't let them know he was home yet. He had to know more. He had to understand what this girl, Mia Carter, was doing to his sons. Was she a savior? Or was she, as he feared, giving them dangerous false hope that would eventually shatter them completely? He headed for his study, a plan forming in his mind. He needed to see everything. Arthur sat in the leather armchair of his dimly lit study, the silence of the house once again pressing in on him. But now the silence felt charged, vibrating with the secret life he had just discovered on the patio. He stared at the 3 framed photographs on his desk. They were taken the summer before the crash. Lucas, holding a football trophy aloft, yelling in triumph. Nathan, covered in paint, grinning crookedly next to a mural he'd just finished. Oliver, mid-debate, looking fiercely intelligent in a suit that was slightly too big for him. He looked at those vibrant, unstoppable boys, and then thought of the silent ghosts in wheelchairs who had inhabited this house for the past 3 years. The contrast was unbearable. He remembered the early days after the accident, the endless surgeries, the grim-faced doctors explaining that while their cognitive functions were perfectly intact, their spinal cords were irreparably damaged at the thoracic level. They would never walk again. Arthur had attacked the problem the only way he knew how, with aggression and money. He retrofitted the house into a sterile fortress of accessibility. He hired the most expensive, highly credentialed medical staff available, stern women in crisp uniforms who spoke in clinical terms about bowel programs and pressure sore mitigation. They treated the boys like patients in an intensive care unit, not teenage boys whose lives had been stolen. The nurses prioritized safety over dignity. They forbade trips outside the sterilized environments because of infection risks. They pureed food because Nathan had choked once in a fit of crying during the first month. They managed the boys' bodies, but they utterly ignored their souls. The boys rebelled with vitriol. They screamed, they threw things, and eventually they just shut down. They became the broken things the system treated them as. And Arthur, unable to bear their hatred and his own crushing guilt for buying them the fast cars, for not being there that night, had retreated. And now, here was Mia. A 21-year-old with no medical degrees, achieving more in 3 weeks with pasta and attitude than a legion of doctors had in 3 years. It terrified him. A knock on the study door startled him. It was Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't realize you had arrived." "Welcome home, sir." Her eyes darted around the room, assessing his mood. "Shall I inform the young masters you are here?" "No," Arthur said sharply. Then, softening his tone, "Not yet. Mrs. Higgins, the new girl, Mia, tell me about her." Mrs. Higgins pursued her lips. Clearly, she was not a fan. "Mia Carter, young, inexperienced. Frankly, sir, I don't think she understands the gravity of the situation. She's unorthodox. I've caught her playing loud music in their rooms. And I suspect she's been sneaking them food that isn't on their approved dietary plan." Arthur nodded slowly. "Send her in here, now." 5 minutes later, Mia Carter stood in front of his massive mahogany desk. Up close, she was even more striking. Her eyes were large, intelligent, and currently filled with a wary assessment of the billionaire seated before her. She didn't fidget. She stood with a natural poise that bordered on defiance. "Mr. Sterling, you wanted to see me?" Her voice was calm, melody-free now. Arthur stood up, imposing his full height and presence on the room. He walked around the desk, leaning against the front of it, crossing his arms. "I arrived home an hour ago, Miss Carter. I walked out to the patio and saw quite a scene." Mia didn't flinch, but he saw a slight tightening around her jaw. "Oh, I saw my sons outside, eating solid food, without medical supervision." His voice was low, dangerous. "Do you have any idea the risks you are taking? Nathan has a history of aspiration. Lucas has temperature regulation issues. They aren't normal teenagers." Mia held his gaze. A spark of anger ignited in her dark eyes. "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice firm, "that is exactly what they are. They are 19-year-old men. They are not infants, and they are not dying. They are paralyzed. They require specialized care," Arthur snapped, his guilt manifesting as anger. "Care you are not qualified to give. You were hired to clean their rooms and change their sheets, not play therapist and nutritionist." Mia took a step forward, the apron feeling suddenly like armor. "I was hired to help them live here. And for 3 years, from what I can tell, they haven't been living. They've been rotting in expensive rooms while everyone tiptoes around them, waiting for them to, I don't know what, die of boredom." "You are crossing a line," Arthur warned, stunned by her audacity. No employee spoke to him like this. "Someone had to," Mia fired back, her passion breaking through her professional demeanor. "Sir, when I got here, those boys were starving. Not for food, though the sludge they were being fed was criminal, but for dignity, for agency. They had no say in what they wore, what they ate, or when they saw the sun. You treated them like broken furniture that needed dusting. I treat them like human beings. And if Nathan chokes on that pasta, if Lucas gets heat stroke," Arthur pressed, his deepest fears rising to the surface, "will your dignity save them then?" "Nathan has excellent throat control now because we practice," Mia said, refusing to back down. "And Lucas knows his body. He knows when he's getting too hot. They need to learn their new limits, Mr. Sterling, not be terrified of them. You're so afraid of them getting hurt that you're letting them waste away." She stopped, breathing hard. She had gone too far. She knew it. She expected to be fired on the spot. Arthur stared at her. He was furious, yes. But underneath the fury was a sickening realization that she might be right. He remembered Lucas's smile. He remembered the sound of Oliver laughing at the salty sauce. "Get out," Arthur whispered, turning his back on her to face the window. He heard her soft footsteps retreat, the door clicking shut behind her. Arthur stood by the window for a long time as the afternoon faded into twilight. He was a man at war with himself. His protective instincts screamed that Mia was reckless, a liability. Yet his desperate heart remembered the image of his sons on the balcony, looking almost happy. He couldn't just trust her. The stakes were too high. He needed proof that her methods weren't just lucky foolishness. As darkness fell, Arthur returned to his desk and opened his laptop. He accessed the estate's sophisticated security system. He had installed cameras in the common areas of the boys' suite years ago to monitor the night nurses, ensuring they weren't sleeping on the job. He clicked on the live feed for the triplets' shared living area. It was 10:30 p.m. They should have been asleep for hours, according to the strict schedule the previous medical team had established. The room on the screen was dimly lit by a warm corner lamp. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. They weren't asleep. Lucas, Nathan, and Oliver were all out of bed, sitting in their chairs in a loose semicircle. And Mia was there. She wasn't in her uniform anymore. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor rug in the middle of them, holding a thick book. Arthur turned up the volume on his laptop. Mia was reading aloud. It wasn't a children's book. It was The Count of Monte Cristo, a story of supreme vengeance and ultimate redemption. As she read, her voice animated and full of character, Arthur watched his sons. Oliver was leaning forward, chin resting on his hand, totally engrossed. Nathan was sketching something on a pad balanced on his knees, his movements slow but deliberate. And Lucas, the angry, volcanic Lucas, was watching Mia read, a look of profound peace on his face that Arthur hadn't seen since he was a child, listening to bedtime stories. Mia paused in her reading. "Okay. Edmond Dantes is about to make his move. What do you think? Does he deserve revenge, or is he just perpetuating the cycle of violence?" Oliver immediately piped up. "He deserves it. They took everything from him. But if he destroys them, doesn't he destroy himself too?" Nathan asked quietly, looking up from his sketch. They were debating. They were engaged. They were alive in that room, in a way Arthur hadn't seen in years. Then Mia did something that made Arthur put a hand over his mouth to stifle a sob. She closed the book. "Okay, enough gloom and doom for tonight. Lucas, your shoulders were tight earlier. Come here." On the screen, Lucas rolled his chair closer to where she sat on the floor. Mia didn't stand up to tower over him. She stayed low on the floor, looking up at him. She gently began to massage his paralyzed shoulders and neck. It wasn't a clinical, therapeutic massage performed by a physical therapist in latex gloves. It was a human touch, caring, gentle. "Better?" she asked softly. Lucas nodded, his eyes closing. "Yeah. Thanks, Mia. You guys are warriors," Mia whispered to them, her voice thick with emotion that the microphone barely picked up. "Don't you ever forget that. The world thinks you're done. Let's prove them wrong." Arthur closed the laptop lid, plunging his study back into darkness. He sat in the dark, tears streaming down his cheeks. For the first time since the funeral of the boy's mother 10 years ago, he had accused her of being reckless, but watching her on that screen, he realized she wasn't being reckless with their lives. She was saving them. She was giving them the one thing his billions couldn't buy, and the one thing his own fear had prevented him from offering: love. Pure, uncomplicated human connection. He realized with a shudder of self-loathing that his son was right. He had preferred them broken, because if they were broken, he didn't have to face the complicated mess of trying to help them live. Mia Carter had started a war in his house, a war against despair. And Arthur Sterling knew, sitting in the dark, that he had been fighting on the wrong side. But how could he cross over without destroying the fragile trust she had built? How could he be a father to sons who believed he wanted them broken? The transformation of the Sterling estate over the next month was nothing short of miraculous, though it happened quietly, like the first green shoots breaking through winter frost. The house, once a mausoleum of silence and antiseptic smells, began to hum with a strange new energy. Arthur found himself coming home earlier and earlier. The boardroom battles that had once consumed his every waking thought now seemed trivial compared to the drama unfolding in his own backyard. He had become a silent observer, watching from the periphery as Mia Carter rebuilt his sons, piece by broken piece. One Tuesday afternoon, Arthur stood in the doorway of the sunroom, a space that had been unused for years. The furniture had been pushed back. In the center of the room, Nathan sat in his wheelchair, facing a large canvas propped on a specialized easel. His hands were still too tremulous for fine brushwork, but Mia had improvised. She had rigged a specially balanced brush holder that Nathan could grip between his teeth. Arthur held his breath. Nathan was painting. He moved his head with intense concentration, slashing vibrant streaks of crimson and azure across the white surface. It wasn't just random strokes, it was an abstraction of chaos and fire, a raw expression of the anger he had swallowed for 3 years. "Chin up a little, Nate," Mia said softly. She was sitting on a stool nearby, mixing paints on a palette, her face smudged with blue. "Don't strain your neck. Let the brush do the work." Nathan paused, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's hard, Mia." "I know," she replied, wiping his brow with a cloth. "But look at it. It's beautiful. It's real." Nathan looked at the canvas, and for the first time, Arthur saw pride in his son's eyes instead of shame. Arthur stepped into the room. The floorboard creaked. Nathan froze. The brush fell from his mouth. Mia turned quickly, instinctively stepping between the boy and his father, a protective lioness. "Mr. Sterling?" Mia said, her voice guarding the moment. "Don't stop," Arthur said, his voice thick. He walked slowly toward the easel. "Nathan, I didn't know you were painting again." Nathan looked down, his jaw tight. "Just messing around." "It's not just messing around," Arthur said, looking at the violent, beautiful swirl of colors. "It reminds me of that mural you did at the community center, the one with the phoenix." Nathan's head snapped up, shock registering on his face. "You remember that?" "I remember everything, son," Arthur said softly. "I'm sorry I haven't said it enough." There was a heavy silence. Mia watched them, her heart pounding. She caught Arthur's eye and gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. "Keep going," her eyes said. "I was wondering," Arthur stammered, feeling more nervous than he ever had in front of shareholders. If I could join you boys for dinner tonight, on the patio." Nathan looked at Mia. She smiled. "I think we can set an extra place, right, Nate?" "Yeah," Nathan mumbled, a faint blush on his cheeks. "Yeah, okay, Dad." That dinner marked a turning point. It was awkward at first. Oliver, the intellect of the trio, tested Arthur with sharp questions about the stock market, looking for the usual dismissive answers. But Arthur engaged him. He debated him. He treated Oliver not as an invalid, but as a young man with a sharp mind. Lucas remained quiet, eating with a fork that Mia had modified with a rubber grip, but he listened. As the weeks passed, Arthur became a fixture at these meals. He watched Mia work her magic. She was relentless but kind. She teased them, challenged them, and refused to let them wallow. And in doing so, she challenged Arthur too. He found himself watching her more than he should. He noticed the way the sunlight caught the loose curls escaping her bun. He noticed the kindness in her hands when she adjusted the boys' chairs. He noticed that for the first time in 10 years, the ice around his own heart was melting. One evening, after the boys had gone to sleep, exhausted but happy after a wheelchair race Mia had organized in the long hallway, Arthur found Mia in the kitchen. She was making tea, looking tired. "You're working too hard," Arthur said, leaning against the doorframe. Mia jumped slightly, then relaxed. They had a good day today. Lucas laughed so hard he got the hiccups. "Thank you," Arthur said, stepping into the light. He looked at her with an intensity that made the air in the kitchen grow thin. "You gave me my sons back, Mia. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Mia said softly, looking down at her tea. "Just be there for them. That's all they want. They just want their dad." Arthur reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the counter. "They aren't the only ones who needed saving, Mia." The moment hung there, fragile and electric. The distance between the billionaire and the maid vanished, replaced by the raw connection of two people who cared deeply for the same 3 souls. But in the shadows of the hallway, Mrs. Higgins watched. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She had run the Sterling household for 20 years with an iron fist. She controlled the budget, the staff, and the flow of information. Since the accident, she'd enjoyed a quiet house and a detached employer who signed whatever expense report she put in front of him. Now, this girl, this upstart from the wrong side of town, was ruining everything. The boys were becoming independent, which meant they were becoming demanding. And worst of all, Arthur was checking the accounts. He was present. Mrs. Higgins's comfortable reign of skimming household funds and exerting total control was under threat. She saw the look in Arthur's eyes as he looked at Mia. She saw the vulnerability, and she knew exactly how to destroy it. She knew Arthur's weak point, his fear of being used, his fear that everyone only wanted him for his money. The next morning, Mrs. Higgins went into Arthur's private dressing room while he was in the shower. She opened the velvet jewelry box on the dresser. Inside lay a diamond-encrusted vintage watch, a Patek Philippe that had belonged to Arthur's grandfather. It was priceless, but more than that, it was the one heirloom Arthur cherished above all else. With gloved hands, she took the watch. She walked silently down the service corridor to the small room Mia occupied. She slipped the watch deep into the bottom of Mia's worn canvas tote bag, buried under a pile of books. "Let's see him look at you, with those eyes now," Mrs. Higgins whispered to the empty room. The crash came 2 days later. It started with a frantic search. Arthur was due at a charity gala, one of the few public appearances he still made. He wanted to wear the grandfather's watch, a symbol of the sterling legacy. He tore apart his dressing room. Drawers were pulled out, boxes overturned. The panic rising in his chest wasn't just about an object, it was a violation of his sanctuary. "Mrs. Higgins!" Arthur bellowed down the stairs. The housekeeper appeared instantly, her face a picture of practiced concern. "Sir, what is the matter?" "My grandfather's watch, the Patek, it's gone. I left it right here on the dresser 2 nights ago." Mrs. Higgins gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. "Oh, no, sir, are you certain?" "I am certain." Arthur paced the room, his face flushed. "Has anyone been in here?" Mrs. Higgins hesitated. The pause was theatrical, perfectly timed. "Well, I didn't want to say anything, sir, but I have seen Mia coming out of this wing of the house. I told her the master suite is off limits for cleaning unless I supervise, but she said she was looking for books for the boys." Arthur stopped pacing. The blood drained from his face. "Mia?" "She has been struggling, sir," Mrs. Higgins whispered, stepping closer, her voice dripping with poison. "I overheard her on the phone, something about her brother owing money to dangerous people. She was crying, saying she would find a way to get the cash." The seed was planted. It found fertile ground in Arthur's old scars. He remembered the friends who had betrayed him for loans, the women who had dated him for press. The idea that Mia, the one person he had let in, was just another grifter playing a long con to get close to his wealth. It broke him. It turned his newfound hope into a cold, hard rage. "Bring her to the foyer," Arthur commanded, his voice turning to ice, "and bring her bag. She was leaving for her day off today, wasn't she?" 10 minutes later, Mia stood in the grand foyer. She looked confused, holding her canvas tote bag. Mrs. Higgins stood behind her, looking grim. "Mr. Sterling?" Mia asked, sensing the tension. "Is something wrong? I was just heading out to see my mom." "Open the bag, Mia," Arthur said. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking down at her like a judge. "What?" Mia blinked. "Why? Just open the damn bag," Arthur roared, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Trembling, Mia unzipped the tote. Arthur marched forward, snatched the bag from her and upended it onto the floor. Books, a hairbrush and a spare uniform tumbled out, and there, clattering loudly against the marble, fell the diamond Patek Philippe watch. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia stared at the watch, her eyes widening in horror. She looked up at Arthur, shaking her head. "No, no, Mr. Sterling, I have never seen that before, I swear." Arthur looked at the watch, then at her. The betrayal felt like a physical knife in his gut. "You were good, Mia, I'll give you that. You played the boys. You played me. You made us feel safe so you could rob us blind." "I didn't!" Mia cried, tears springing to her eyes. "Someone put that there, please! Arthur, Mr. Sterling, think! Why would I steal from you? I love those boys!" "Don't you dare speak about them," Arthur hissed. "You used them." "Get out. Get out of my house before I call the police." "But get out!" Mia looked at him, seeing the wall of ice that had slammed back into place. She looked at Mrs. Higgins, who offered a small, triumphant smirk that only Mia could see. Realizing she had no defense against this ambush, Mia grabbed her empty bag and ran out the front door, sobbing. Arthur stood in the foyer, breathing hard, staring at the watch. He felt no relief. He felt only a vast, crushing hollowness. The next morning, the house was silent. Arthur walked into the boys' dining room for breakfast, trying to compose himself. He had told Mrs. Higgins to prepare the boys' favorite pancakes. He would explain that Mia had to leave, that she wasn't who they thought she was. He entered the room. The pancakes were cold on the table. The wheelchairs were empty. Panic surged again. Arthur ran to the boys' suite. The door was locked. "Lucas, Nathan, Oliver!" He pounded on the door. "Open up." "Go away." Lucas's voice came through the wood. It wasn't the voice of the son he had reclaimed over the last few weeks. It was the voice of the stranger from 3 years ago. Guttural. Dead. "Boys, please, we need to talk. Mia stole from us. She was a thief." "Liar!" Oliver screamed from inside. "She didn't do it." "I found the watch in her bag," Arthur shouted back, desperate for them to understand. "We don't care about your stupid watch," Nathan yelled. "We want Mia." They refused to come out. By lunch, the tray Mrs. Higgins left outside their door was untouched. By dinner, the silence was terrifying. The regression was instant and total. It was as if the last month had never happened. The darkness had returned, heavier than before, because now they knew what the light felt like, and it had been snatched away. Arthur sat in the hallway outside their door, his head in his hands. He had protected his property, but he had lost his sons. Again. Round midnight, the lock on the door clicked. Arthur looked up, hopeful. Lucas rolled out. He looked terrible, eyes red and swollen, face pale. He was holding his tablet. He didn't look at his father. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask of cold fury. He rolled up to Arthur and shoved the tablet into his chest. "Watch," Lucas said. His voice was trembling with rage. "You care so much about evidence. Watch." Arthur took the tablet. On the screen was a video file. It was grainy, black and white, infrared footage. "We set up a camera," Lucas said, his voice cracking, "last week, because Mia was worried Mrs. Higgins was messing with our meds. We wanted to catch her. We caught something else." Arthur pressed play. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. The camera angle showed the view from a bookshelf in the hallway, looking directly into the open door of the small staff room Mia used. The video showed Mia leaving the room. The hallway was empty for an hour. Then a figure appeared, Mrs. Higgins. She looked left and right, checking if the coast was clear. She slipped into the room. She was inside for 30 seconds. When she came out, her hands were empty, but she was adjusting her apron, looking smug. Arthur watched the video again. Then a third time, the world tilted on its axis. He looked up at Lucas. "She didn't steal it," Lucas whispered, tears finally spilling over his angry cheeks. "Higgins planted it. Mia was innocent. And you threw her out like garbage." Arthur dropped the tablet. The horror of what he had done washed over him. He had taken the word of a bitter employee over the woman who had saved his family. He had let his cynicism destroy the only pure thing in his life. He stood up, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Where is she?" Arthur asked, his voice breaking. "Lucas, do you know where she lives?" "She's gone," Lucas said, turning his wheelchair away. "She texted us goodbye an hour ago. She's at the bus station. She's going back to Alabama. She said she can't stay in a city where she's called a thief." Arthur looked at his watch, the cursed Patek Philippe on his wrist. It was 12:15 a.m. The last night bus to the south left at 1 a.m. "Mrs. Higgins is fired," Arthur said, his voice finding a new steel resolve. "If she is still in this house when I get back, I will have her arrested." He didn't wait for Lucas to answer. He didn't grab a coat. He didn't call the chauffeur. Arthur Sterling sprinted through the house, grabbed his car keys, and burst out the front door into the rain that had started to fall. He had 45 minutes to save his life. The rain hammered against the windshield of the Maybach, turning the city lights into smeared streaks of neon and grey. Arthur Sterling drove with a recklessness that would have terrified his board of directors. He wasn't driving a luxury car, he was piloting a desperate missile through the heart of the storm. His knuckles were white on the leather steering wheel. Every red light was a personal insult. Every slow-moving truck was an obstacle to his redemption. 12:45 a.m. 15 minutes. He had 15 minutes to undo the greatest mistake of his life. The image of Lucas's face, twisted in pain and righteous anger, burned in Arthur's mind. She didn't do it. The words echoed over the roar of the engine. He had been so ready to believe the worst, so conditioned by a life of transaction and betrayal that he hadn't recognized genuine goodness when it was living under his own roof. He had treated Mia like a liability to be managed, rather than the blessing she was. He swerved onto the exit ramp for the central bus terminal, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The terminal was a stark contrast to the world Arthur inhabited. It was a place of fluorescent harshness, smelling of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and transient despair. Arthur abandoned the car in a no-parking zone, not caring if it was towed or stolen. He ran into the main hall, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the grimy tile. The station was chaotic. People were sleeping on benches. Announcements blared over a crackling PA system. Arthur scanned the crowd, his heart pounding in his throat. He looked for the practical bun, the canvas tote bag, the posture of quiet resilience. Last call for Express Bus 404 to Birmingham and Mobile. Boarding at Gate 7, the loudspeaker crackled. Gate 7. Arthur sprinted. He pushed past a group of backpackers, ignoring their shouts of protest. He reached the gate just as the line of passengers was dwindling. The driver was already reaching for the lever to close the cargo hold. And there she was. Mia was handing her ticket to the attendant. She looked smaller than he remembered, her shoulders slumped in a way that broke his heart. She wore a thick grey coat he hadn't seen before, probably bought at a thrift store for the journey. She looked defeated. "Mia!" The shout tore from his throat, raw and unrefined. Mia froze. She didn't turn around initially, as if she thought her mind was playing cruel tricks on her. "Mia, wait!" Arthur reached the line, breathless, rain dripping from his hair, ruining his silk suit. She turned slowly. When she saw him, her expression didn't soften. It hardened into a mask of hurt and exhaustion. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely audible over the idling bus engine, "if you're here to accuse me of stealing something else, you'll have to call the police. I have nothing left for you to take." The passengers in line stared. A billionaire in a wetsuit confronting a young woman at a Greyhound station. It was a scene from a soap opera, but the pain in the air was visibly real. "I didn't come to accuse you," Arthur gasped, stepping past the security rope. "I came to beg you." Mia took a step back, clutching her ticket. "Go home, Arthur. Go back to your mansion. You made it very clear where I belong." "I was wrong," Arthur said, his voice cracking. He didn't care about the audience anymore. He didn't care about his dignity. "Lucas showed me the video, the hidden camera. We saw Higgins planting the watch." Mia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of relief passing through them, followed immediately by a resurgence of sadness. "So? You know I'm not a thief. Good. You can mail me my severance check. I'm getting on this bus." "Please don't," Arthur pleaded, reaching out a hand but stopping short of touching her. "The boys! They've stopped eating. They locked themselves in their room. They won't speak to me. They need you, Mia. They are drowning without you." Mia looked at the bus, then back at him. "They have a father, Mr. Sterling. They need you. I was just the help, and the help is disposable, right? That's what you showed me. One accusation, and I was trash to you." Her words were like bullets, and they hit the mark. Arthur flinched. "You weren't just the help," Arthur said, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. You were the only light in that house for 3 years, and I was jealous. I was scared. I saw them loving you, and I realized how much I had failed them. I pushed you away because I was ashamed of myself, not because I doubted you. He took a step closer, his blue eyes searching hers. I'm not asking the maid to come back to work, Arthur said, his voice trembling with emotion. I'm asking the woman who saved my sons to come back home. I can't do this without you. We can't do this without you. The bus driver honked the horn. Lady, you getting on or what? We gotta roll. Mia looked at the dark, open door of the bus. An escape to a simpler, harder life, but a life with no accusations. Then she looked at Arthur. She saw the rain on his face, the desperation in his posture, and the raw honesty in his eyes. She thought of Lucas's smile, Nathan's painting, Oliver's laugh. She sighed, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to deflate the tension in her shoulders. If I come back, she said, her voice stern, Higgins is gone. Tonight. She's already gone, Arthur vowed. Security escorted her out an hour ago. She'll never step foot near us again. And no more distinct lines, Mia continued, poking a finger at his wet lapel. No more Mr. Sterling in the ivory tower while I'm in the trenches. We are a team. We handle the boys together. You have to show up every day. Arthur grabbed her hand, bringing it to his chest. I promise, on my life, Mia, I promise. Mia looked at the bus driver. I'm not going. She handed the ticket to a stunned teenager standing behind her. Here, take the window seat. The drive back to the estate was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. When they pulled up to the mansion, the lights were blazing. Arthur had called ahead to the night security to wake the house. They walked in the front door together. The door to the triplets' suite burst open. "My-ay!" The shout was collective. Lucas, Nathan and Oliver came rolling into the foyer with a speed that threatened to tip their chairs. They didn't stop. They surrounded her. Mia dropped to her knees on the marble floor, embracing them, buried in a tangle of arms and wheels. There were tears, laughter, and a chaotic mix of explanations. Arthur stood back, watching. This time, he didn't feel the pang of jealousy. He felt a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that love wasn't a finite resource. Mia loving them didn't mean they loved him less. It meant there was more love to go around. 3 weeks later. The autumn air was crisp, but the sun was dazzlingly bright. The scene on the back patio was a mirror of the one Arthur had stumbled upon a month ago, but the resolution was higher, the colors more vivid. The table was set. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air. Mrs. Higgins was a distant memory, replaced by a cheerful older woman named Rosa, who followed Mia's lead without question. But today, the focus was on the table. Arthur sat at the head of the table, not in a suit, but in a casual cashmere sweater. He looked younger, the lines of stress around his eyes smoothed out by weeks of genuine connection. Mia sat to his right. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a cream sundress. She was technically still the manager of household affairs, but everyone knew she was the heartbeat of the family. The triplets were eating, laughing, debating the merits of a new video game. But suddenly, the table went quiet. Oliver, the one with the most severe spinal injury, the one who had struggled the most with upper body motor control, was staring at his plate. His hands were resting on his lap. I want to do it, Oliver said softly. The chatter stopped. Lucas looked at his brother. Ollie, you tired? You want me to help? No, Oliver said, his voice tightening with determination. I want to do it myself. Arthur started to stand up, his instinct to assist kicking in. Son, let me... Mia's hand shot out, gripping Arthur's forearm. Her grip was strong. She shook her head slightly. Wait. Arthur sat back down, his heart hammering. The patio was silent, save for the chirping of birds. All eyes were on Oliver. He focused on the fork lying next to his plate. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a second to visualize the neural pathways he had been visualizing in therapy with Mia every single day. Connect, signal, move. His right shoulder twitched. Then his arm lifted. It was jerky, uncoordinated, moving through the air as if through water. His hand hovered over the fork. "Come on, Oliver," Nathan whispered, leaning forward. "You got this, bro," Lucas added, his fists clenched in sympathy. Oliver's hand descended. His fingers, usually curled and stiff, strained to open. He fumed with the utensil. Once, twice. The fork clattered against the plate. He let out a frustrated grunt, tears of exertion pricking his eyes. "I can't." "You can," Mia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it commanded the space. "Don't think about the hand. Think about the movement, like we practiced. From the shoulder." Arthur watched, agonizingly helpless. He wanted to do it for him. He wanted to take away the struggle. But he understood now. The struggle was the point. The struggle was the life. Oliver gritted his teeth. He tried again. This time, his palm clamped over the handle. He dragged it closer. He didn't have the dexterity to hold it traditionally, but he managed to weave the handle between his knuckles. He lifted. The fork shook violently. A piece of chicken fell off. He didn't stop. Slowly, agonizingly, the fork rose. 6 inches. 10 inches. Arthur stopped breathing. Oliver leaned his head forward, meeting the fork halfway. He took the bite. For a second, nobody moved. The magnitude of the moment hung in the air, a simple bite of food that represented a mountain climbed, a life reclaimed. Then the patio erupted. Lucas slammed his hand on the table. "Yes!" Nathan cheered. Arthur let out a laugh that sounded like a sob, clapping until his hand stung. Oliver chewed, swallowing with a grin that lit up the entire backyard. He looked at his father. "Needs more salt." The tension broke into raucous laughter. Arthur looked across the table at Mia. The sunlight caught her profile as she laughed with the boys, her eyes shining with pride. She looked at him, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. There was no boss and employee, no billionaire and maid. There was just a man and a woman who had walked through fire to save 3 young men, and in the process had saved each other. Arthur reached out across the corner of the table. Mia looked down at his hand, then up at his eyes. She smiled, a soft, private smile that promised a future they hadn't yet spoken of, but both knew was coming. She placed her hand in his. "To family," Arthur said, raising his glass, his voice steady and full. "To family," the boys echoed. "To family," Mia whispered. And on the balcony of the Sterling estate, bathed in the golden light of a new beginning, the triplets finished their lunch, not as patients, but as young men with a future, watched over by a father who had finally come home. The end.